Hills and Valleys is a podcast that uncovers stories from leaders in healthcare, tech, and everything in between. Straight from the heart of Silicon Valley, we give you a look at the good, the bad, and the future, one episode at a time. Brought to you by Potrero Medical. Hey everyone, Omar M. Khatib, Director of Growth here at Potrero Medical with another great episode of Hills and Valleys. And I finally got him, one of my favorite content creators online, the infamous, the well-known and respected Dr. Austin Lee Chiang. Dr. Chiang, thanks so much for coming on. It's great to finally have you. We see you quite often on Instagram and TikTok and everywhere else. So we're happy we're able to have you on, considering your busy schedule.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we talked earlier, you wear a lot of hats in your current role, but can you, for the audience that's watching, can you tell them your full role? Because I think a lot of people know you as this great content creator, as a physician, and great teacher online. But outside of that, what's the day job, I guess?
Yeah, well, I have a full-time day job. So despite all that content creation, clinical work is still kind of the mainstay for me. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Jefferson Health here in Philadelphia. I'm also the director of the endoscopic bariatric program and the chief medical social media officer for the entire Jefferson Health enterprise. I'm also the founding president of the Association for Healthcare Social Media, which is a 501c3 nonprofit professional society to help health professionals get on social media and use it responsibly and effectively.
That's fantastic. And that's definitely something I want to come back to in a moment. But, real quick, the thing that we often don't see from leaders like you is the backstory. So tell us about, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? How did you get into medicine?
So I am originally from Southern California, and I moved abroad to Taiwan when I was 10. Came back for college, went to Duke for college, med school at Columbia in New York. Stayed there for internal medicine residency for another 3 years, and then moved to Boston for my gastroenterology fellowship for another 3 years at Brigham and Women's Hospital. During those 3 years, I actually completed a second fellowship in bariatric endoscopy and also obtained my master's in public health from the Chiang Harvard School of Public Health. And then came here to Philadelphia to do my final year of training in advanced endoscopy, so my third and final fellowship, and then that really, completed my entire medical training experience. I really got into medicine, pretty cliche, but it's a combination of my interest in science and health and the human body, and just wanting to help people. And fortunately, I had a couple examples in my family, cousins who were physicians, my grandfather who was a surgeon, to kind of set that example for me.
It's fantastic. I'm sure it probably felt, so good to, after completing those fellowships. What people don't understand is how much blood, sweat, and tears it takes to go through that. Because essentially you're being worked like a dog and you're getting paid very, very little. So it's really hard. And I commend you for going through it, but it must feel so good to get out and get to a place like Jefferson Health.
It was very liberating. I think it was a total of 15 years after high school. So, 11 years after college, a total of 15 years after high school. So it was a long time coming. And I think I'm very fortunate to be at a place that's very supportive of some of these more out of the box ideas. And part of the reason why I have this whole social media role is because of the fact that, the leadership at this institution is very, forward thinking. So I know that this is not common to have a role like this, and hopefully, I believe that there needs to be more social media leadership across all academic institutions.
Absolutely, I 100% agree, and I think this is one of the things that when I first found you, I think it was first through Instagram a year or so ago, that it really resonates for me because, at least for me, I'm trying to do the same thing in my industry. I feel like in medical devices that, look, our quote unquote customers, the people we want to do business with, physicians, hospital administrators, nurses, they're on social media. And so I think it's important to create content, to engage, to build that trust versus this old model of showing up to your workplace out of the blue and saying, hey, can I talk to you about this random product? Like it's it's old and outdated, and I hope that a lot of my peers are starting to think about this new way, especially considering that COVID's here. And one of the things I showed is, I think on PubMed, if you look for the last 20 years, there's just been this hockey stick curve on the number of publications in social media by physicians. Like that doesn't happen by accident.
Mhm.
So when you were in fellowship, or when did you start this journey in content creation and social media? Did you do that during fellowship or when you graduated?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always been a fan of social media growing up. You know, I went through the MySpace age and Friendster, and
We're part
when
of that
Facebook
same
came along,
generation.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, when Facebook first came along, I really enjoyed it, and so I've just always been a fan and always bought into the idea. And earlier, sort of halfway through med school, I realized that there was that disconnect that you were describing, that patients are getting information online and they're exposed to all sorts of information, and yet there aren't very many professionals on social media, or at least back then there were much fewer. And I felt the need to be someone out there who had the training to talk about certain things, to put that factual information out there. And so I spent some time at ABC News, actually wanting to learn the whole process of how medical journal publications found its way onto the evening news. And in that process,
Wow.
kind of saw how the network was using social media as a way to facilitate conversations online. So that's really how I got into it. And I started out on Twitter, and then over the years went onto Instagram and TikTok, as you mentioned. And along the way, ran into a lot of different hurdles, being a trainee, being at an academic institution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So then I started doing research to kind of justify my use of social media in some
Mm-hmm.
ways. And that's, so the publications that you were describing, that rise in publications, I definitely was contributing to that and active as part of that. And and so, yeah, I think that that's really how I got into it, and here we are now.
Now, I gotta ask, because I know plenty of my friends from medical school are getting out of residency, but I know plenty of people who are getting into residency. And considering how hierarchical medicine is, I'm gonna guess you got a lot of flack when you were in training, like being on social media and everything. What was that like? Because it must have been so difficult to uh, either get that kind of resistance. I'm sure people tried to make you feel bad about it and stop it. I mean, how did you push through and not listen? Especially being like a fellow or trainee, it's people can kind of decide your future. So how did you stand up, and how did you find the courage to kind of keep going?
Yeah, that's a great point. You just reminded me of some moments when I think,
Am I bringing a little PTSD back? Just
well, it's
to
actually like a good moment, actually, when I got some positive feedback from patients who would come across my content online and give me encouragement, and that really showed me that I was doing something helpful. And actually, another point that I want to make is that there was definitely a lot of hesitation, even from my end, going into it, feeling like I wasn't quite an authority yet at the time. And
Mm,
so I really stayed within certain boundaries about what I would be talking about. And over time have expanded that based on like what I understand and what I know.
mhm.
But yeah, I did get some flack in the beginning. And it was really interesting because as social media kind of grew, and I saw other people were catching on, the various, I think part of it was the research that I was doing really helped kind of legitimize what I was doing. The other thing was, because of that research, I was also getting involved with our professional societies. So I had the societies buying into what I was doing as well, at least in my field in gastroenterology. So soon enough, I was helping the GI societies with their messaging and their social media efforts. And from there, it just, one thing led to another. And suddenly you have like formalized curricula at certain programs, dedicating a noon conference to social media to educate their trainees about how to use it. And so by the time I left the Brigham, more than half the faculty was on social media alongside me, and we were actively kind of a social media machine at that point.
That's amazing. Yeah, and one thing that is I don't want to say it surprised me, but it was amazing to see. Was, I remember a few years ago, as I was going through social media, both for my personal brand, but also for the companies I worked for, and I saw the rise in users on LinkedIn. But then I remember looking more deeper into Twitter, and this is a few years ago, right? Um, and seeing how many physicians are on there, not only having open discussions during conferences, but having journal club. The nephrologists are wild on
Yeah.
Twitter. They have their own like social media internship. They have journal club twice a month. So this is like, it's amazing to see that, because it's I mean, think of it like this, like for both of us back when we were in medical school, these things didn't really exist to that extent. And I learned more about nephrology just following the threads on Neph Twitter than I did in my own, nephrology unit. No offense to my professor back then, but like, it's real time and live. And you're seeing
Yeah.
debates, you're seeing people update information, which I think on the HCP side for physicians is great. But there's this other side where I'm trying to encourage more physicians, which is there have to be more of you. There's only one of you, right? So there
Yeah.
have to be more, because again, patients, whether it's people who are young, like us, or people who are older, are getting their information from, the internet. And the biggest thing is that we kind of joke about memes and everything, but memetics has been around for a while, and it's a very powerful thing. So your short videos on certain physiological processes probably have more influence on people understanding certain diseases or procedures than if they go and search things on Google. That's just the fact, because it's short, it's memorable, you know. Um,
Yeah.
if you were to look like, I don't know, 20 years from now, what would have to happen for you to be like, wow, like I'm really proud that I was part of that movement, and here we are now. What does that look like 20 years from now? If you can say, I hope for something to happen in the medical community, what would that be?
I mean, I hope that there would be a general understanding from the public that there are experts online that they can access. I think that the novelty of us being on there now, I'm hoping that that rubs off in the future. You know, with every passing generation, I think there's greater adoption of social media. So I think
Hmm.
that at a certain point they'll recognize that, we're not only going to social media to get, cooking demos and fashion advice or whatever it might be, but there's plenty of health information out there. And I think we're seeing it already. When I think about how my experience was like going through medical school and hearing about what med students are, what sort of tools they have nowadays. They have all sorts of apps and
Yeah.
like sort of more like visual graphic, teaching materials than I ever had. And you're absolutely right that some of the things that you're able to learn on Twitter, it doesn't show up in textbooks, because there's always going to be gray areas that even people within the field will disagree on, or just there's not enough evidence for, and we rely on expert opinion, and that's really where we can get it. And actually nephrology, they were way ahead of the game, compared to gastroenterology. And so I know some of the earlier nephrologists who are still very active now, and to see what they've done, I mean, it's incredible. And hopefully, not only does it engage professionals, but like I was alluding to earlier, the general public can also participate and get something out of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest benefit is, on one side you are educating the public, but then again, like, and you can't, the thing is, you can't measure this. You'll never know um, how many medical students, right, who are MS1s or 2s, watch some of your content and get influenced to pick a career in gastroenterology, for example. Because,
Mhm.
the old way when you and I were in medical school, it was like we either had to do time over the summer and shadow somebody, or we have to wait for rotations in third and fourth year. But I think with social media, especially it's really rich between the YouTube videos, Instagram and TikTok videos, discussions on Twitter. I mean, you can really get a good sense of what it's like to be, let's say, a nephrologist or gastroenterologist, what the community is like. Because one of the, I don't know, it's somewhere around here, but I can't remember the book, but I remember reading this book on medicine and picking residencies and stuff. And one of the things it said that never made sense to me until I got into medical school, which was a lot of the times when you pick a specialty to go into, a good part of that is based on where your personality fits.
Hmm.
right? And I never got that until I got in. But then, you can really get a good feel for that environment through social media. Um,
Total.
so for some of the physicians who are listening now, and I know that, I mean, there's some that are, new residents, some that just graduated, there's some that have been in practice for 10, 15 years. If they wanted to get started, I mean, how do you get started? What would you recommend? Because I think they see someone like you and your content and they're like, man, that's just so much to do. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's a small step. What's that small step?
Yeah, I think that first of all, it's getting over that mental hurdle of, being self-conscious and putting yourself out there, which I struggle with every single new app that I've adopted. It's always been a struggle, and I still face that
What do you
Monday.
mean by when you say self-conscious? What do you mean specifically?
Well, I think that, you always, with whatever content I put out there, I'm always in the back of my mind wondering, what are people going to think about this? And I think
Mm.
that to a certain extent, that's a healthy check. There's healthy checks and balances because, we want to make sure that what we're putting out there isn't going to be offensive. It's not going to get us into trouble. And that's why, that's part of my work in trying to help other people, is helping them understand that. And sometimes we've had to learn that the hard way. But getting over that mental hurdle, and on certain platforms, it's not as apparent as others. Like on Twitter, it's all text based. You kind of put it out there, and it almost feels anonymous, which is what makes it sometimes dangerous. But I think when you're on other platforms like Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, it's much more image based. It's you're putting your own likeness out there, and so you feel, I mean, on a superficial level, you feel self-conscious about, the usual stuff about how you look and whatnot, but you're also putting your likeness paired with a message, and so I can see how there's a lot of trepidation going into this. So I mean, so the first step is somehow overcoming that. It might just take practice, and it definitely gets better over time. So I think that some of it is just sticking to it, and then with time you'll get over it. But the other thing is just not spreading yourself too thin to begin with. I think focusing on one platform is often helpful. We see that there's so many different platforms out there, and
Mhm.
everyone wants to do everything all at once, and it's just simply not feasible. And once you get, acquainted with one platform, you'll be able to be more efficient and crank out content much more quickly. And so that certainly has been the case for me.
Mhm.
So I would say, the biggest bang for your buck at this point in time, which will likely change, is probably Twitter for any, physicians out there, just
Mhm.
because there are a lot of other professionals, and in terms of what you gain out of being involved on Twitter, seems like you're not only, networking, but you're also staying up to date with any sort of academic discussion or what's new being put out there by journals and societies. And that's the thing, is like a lot of journals and societies are not yet on other platforms, and so
Mm.
you're not going to get those real-time updates. And that's one less thing that you get out of being on, TikTok, for instance, where there's virtually no medical journal on there.
Right.
And it might not, they may never want to be on those platforms because it just might not fit the model of, what the journal is trying to do, or it just doesn't, certain platforms just make more sense depending on what you want to do. So I guess that's the
Absolutely.
other thing, is finding your purpose and figuring out what exactly you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So, so I think on one side, like for professional engagement and learning, totally agree with you. I think Twitter's high up there as number one. A far second, it would I think would be LinkedIn, but yeah, Twitter I put it really high up. LinkedIn maybe second. But in terms of the public facing side, I think a
Hmm.
lot of physicians they struggle. It's kind of like they struggle between let's say Facebook and Instagram. I think Facebook is kind of the default where it's like the equivalent of having a website back in the 90s or 2000s, like, oh, I should have a Facebook page. But I actually I don't even know if I'm following your Facebook page. I feel like the real game and attention for public awareness and patient awareness is on Instagram. Would you agree?
I think that Facebook, I will admittedly say that I don't spend much time on it anymore. And for somebody, I have the benefit of working at an academic center. For someone who's in private practice, for search engine optimization reasons and things like that, having a Facebook page might be a better option where you can actually kind of promote your business kind of offerings a bit better on there. Instagram, I think in general, yeah, I think that there's, in terms of building a brand and a relationship with the general public, and I think that there is additional value there. Facebook still seems a little bit sterile, you know, as Twitter in some ways, but you know, Instagram is where you can really get a glimpse into the personality a bit more, and I think that is becoming increasingly more important. You know, like I feel like in general, even outside of medicine, we're appealing to feelings much more than, you know, actual kind of facts, which that's the difficult, you know, challenging part, is achieving that balance.
Right. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, this is kind of like, I feel like showing, you know, and again, I really mean it when I say like your content and the brand you have online, I love it because it's unique to you. It's not replicable by anybody. Like there's only one Dr. Chiang. And I think that, you know, in medical school, we learned about that, you know, certain communities, they want to be treated by doctors who represent that community, right? That look like them, that talk like them. But I think part of that also is that, you know, personality is a big part. Like how many times, you know, you and I both, we had a doctor growing up. Our favorite doctors, it wasn't because they were, I mean, yeah, part of it was they were great doctors, but also it was because of their personalities, is how they made us feel when we went to go see them. And so I'm sure like for your patients, I'm guessing they all love to see you because they know who you know, they know your personality, and they built this trust by seeing you online. So when they go to see you, even if it's a really difficult, let's say, a visit, or it's something very serious, there's this trust because it's like, yeah, like this is not some guy that I just see only when I go in the doctor's office. I'm seeing him online, and there's this like familiarity being built. Do you feel like that's happened with you and your patients?
Yeah, I'm seeing it more and more. I think that, you know, as patients are more savvy and are Googling, you know, my name before coming to see me, they'll inevitably come across my social media, and which is a good thing. And a lot of the times, I realize that they often won't mention it, but they will. Some patients will mention it, and I think that they appreciate the fact that I'm on there, and so yeah, I do feel like it gives them a better sense that, you know, look, I'm a human being too. You know, I'm not a machine. I'm not a robot. I'm approachable, and those are all things that I'm hoping to achieve just being on social.
Do you think, you know, I know that they always say in medical school, like, you need to empower the patients to make the best decision and give them the right information. But I think a lot of times patients they can be intimidated by a physician. Do
Mhm.
you feel like from your content online, do you feel that, have you noticed like that more patients are just seem to be a lot more comfortable and at ease talking to you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think that
like
they.
just ask you questions, you know, like you like they ask questions where you're like, wow, I didn't think they would ask me something like that, but that's good.
Oh, totally. And I feel the same thing goes for trainees and aspiring physicians. You know, I remember when I was in college, I would never think to just, you know, DM a physician online. And now people will reach out to me all the time, you know, and I feel like they're so used to seeing me act a certain way online that they feel that comfort level. And in fact, actually yesterday I put on Instagram Reels, it was actually also on TikTok, but it's basically like in some ways a dance, although it was more just summarizing the news about the COVID vaccine
Oh, the
from
Pfizer vaccine, I
Pfizer.
saw it. That was great.
And
Again, I learned more from that 30-second video you made than most of the articles I read. So,
and I mean, that's the thing, is I want to distill what's out there, because there's a lot of, you know, great information coming out of the media, but sometimes it just needs to be distilled into something that's more easily consumed. And you know, the comments I had on there, it's interesting because I think a lot of people know me for doing stuff like that, but for those who are new to it are like, oh, I wish I always got information this way. So I was really glad to see some of that feedback.
Totally. And I think, look, I think that you tapped into something. And if I can, like, encourage you to make more content like that, because here's the thing is, we live in a very, very complicated world. It's getting more complicated. That's why something like Google's $1 billion company, because essentially they curate content and they answer questions as quickly as possible. That's literally what 99% of Google's, you know, close to $1 trillion business does.
Hmm.
And I think with things like medicine and what we were used to back, a decade or two ago and longer is, you would have an expert like yourself go on the news, talk about it from a very non-biased approach, and you're like, okay, that's the information, I know what to do with it. The media has just gotten so much more biased, and to the point where they'll bring on experts just to double down on whatever bias that they might have, right? And so I think the opportunity and the important thing is to have, whether it's not just in medicine but other areas, experts like you who, you're not going on CNN, you're not going on Fox. If you do that, you totally should, by the way. It'll be good for the brand, good for followership. But you distill this stuff down so that instead of me going and reading whether it's on, certain, and you can't tell who has a strong bias or not, right? Instead
Hmm.
of reading this information that looks, it's under the guise of being non-biased, but in reality it is biased.
Hmm.
You've taken and distilled it down, especially something that's as controversial as vaccinations. Like, again, I've read quite a few articles since the Pfizer announcement happened a couple of days ago. Yours was by far the best one.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, yeah. Um, you mentioned something earlier. I wanted to ask you about. You said, getting on social and then like finding your purpose. What do you mean by that? Like, what's your purpose? How did you come about finding it?
Yeah, I think this goes back to that whole idea that there's a disconnect with how patients are getting their information and where they're getting it from and who they're getting it from. And so ultimately that translates to wanting to put out, accurate information and share my expertise. And I mean, I think that beyond that, there are other things that I try to do, like dispel misconceptions about what I do, because a lot of people have ideas of what a gastroenterologist does, and I'm in a very specific subspecialty within that that
Mm,
most people don't know about. So
mhm,
I'm sort of talking about these areas that don't receive as much attention. Um, and then also, humanizing the profession, as we've kind of just been talking about.
mhm,
But not everybody has that goal. Some people want to purely only educate and educate, their peers and their, people who are in the medical profession. There are others who just want to build their practice and promote what they're doing from a business perspective. And I certainly, at an academic center, don't have as much of that interest than, say, somebody in private practice.
mhm.
And so, I think that there's, so it doesn't have to necessarily be, one singular purpose, but, having sort of a main focus. And so for me, it's really facing the general public.
Absolutely. Now, in line with that, and I think this is where you're doing a great service for the medical community and your peers. Um, Tell me a little bit about the nonprofit that you started, because from my understanding, you're helping physicians get online and get on social. Tell us a little bit about that. And again, for everybody who's listening or watching, I'm leaving a link to the nonprofit in the show notes. So you can check it out. But tell us a little bit about that and how people can, find you and what is it all about?
Yeah, for sure. So this actually all came about because several of us who are active on Instagram, this was 2 years ago at this point, we started noticing concerning trends about people misrepresenting themselves, speaking about medical or health issues without having the appropriate credentials. And so we had a hashtag campaign called Verify Healthcare, where we
Mm,
encouraged people to, or we encouraged professionals to share their credentials with everyone and why they were, qualified to speak about whatever topics they speak about, and
mhm,
also to encourage their followers to really double check who they were trusting online.
mhm,
And from there, we started brainstorming about all the different issues and concerns that we were facing with social media, a lot of which never existed before on other platforms. There was this rise in the influencer movement, and then we started noticing that with larger followings, that as health professionals, we were running into issues with like imposter accounts and like, things that,
Healing with crystals and oils.
yeah, or even people just like taking our likeness and using it to promote other products without our permission, and
Oh, really?
all sorts of things, and things that
Wow.
people usually don't even, that we would never have expected. And of course, like when we're talking about controversial topics like vaccines and things like that, we can be targeted from some of these groups that are very anti-science, and there's that's we had to learn the hard way in some instances how to
Mm.
navigate that. So in essence, we wanted to have an entity that could really treat what we're doing here on social media as something just like any other medical subspecialty, and have a
And the name of the
subspecialty.
entity, by the way, can you name?
It's called the Association for Healthcare Social Media,
Got it.
and we have accounts on most of the major social media platforms, but it's AHSM, and our
Mm.
website is ahsm.org. And so basically, we felt that those of us who are active, doing similar things as I'm doing, could come together and share our expertise with other health professionals, so we could really build the number of health professionals who are online, to put out more accurate information, and kind of be those spokespeople for each of our areas of expertise. But we learned again how to do this not only responsibly to avoid all these different pitfalls, but also effectively, because you could put out the best content out there with the most beautifully curated grid, and it might not reach anyone.
I know the feeling, man.
And so a lot of us have spent years working on this, trying to cultivate a following, a community, and engaging with one another. And one key thing, if there's anything to take away, is that social media has to be social. You can't really just put information out there and expect it to take off. There's
Hmm.
got to be a social element where you're engaging with your followers, with other people who are doing similar things, and
What does
collaborate.
that mean, engaging with you? Because you do a very good job of it, but for again, the newbies who are trying to do this, what does that mean, engaging with your followers?
Yeah, I think for me, it's often responding to comments,
Hmm.
which, it's interesting when
And
I
you get a
first,
lot, and you respond to every single one. I've tested
I try to
it.
do as much as I can. But I think when I first entered this space, there was a part of me that, you would see some of the big YouTubers or Instagrammers, and you'd be like, oh, they never respond to anything, so I'm not going to respond to anything either. But
Hmm.
that's because at a certain point they can only do so much, and that's why it appears that way.
Yeah.
But really, to get started, it involves responding to comments, and now all the platforms make it relatively easy to engage through, take Instagram stories, for instance. There are different functions like Q&As and live streaming, and there are different ways to sort of maintain people's attention. um, and so I think that maximizing all those functionalities is important too.
So for and it's AHSM
Yeah,
for AHSM.
awesome for short.
What's up?
Awesome.
Awesome. You are from my generation. So ahsm.org. I'll put that in the show notes. So physicians can go and are there resources there? Do you have a email sign up? What should they do when they go to the website?
Yeah, so we're sort of shifting gears with the organization a bit. We started out wanting to be more of a guidelines forming organization, but we've realized that social media is just one of those spaces that it's really hard to put up guardrails
Super
for.
hard because it
And
just
now,
changes all the
yeah,
time.
exactly. And this whole past year, we've seen just so much evolution with all these platforms, and all the things that they themselves are putting up with. So we're trying to be more resource based moving forward, and so we're going to have a resource library, trying to curate all of like the most helpful resources out there. And we just this past August had our first annual meeting where we had a whole series of lectures. We had a whole patient advocate fireside chat. We had an abstract submission. So it really was treated like an academic conference. And we're hoping to do that again next fall. But the resource page is great. And we've already developed some collaborations, like We've collaborated with YouTube to have a series of, YouTube training sessions coming straight from the YouTube headquarters. And
Awesome.
we also have, with other platforms coming very soon as well. So I think that there's, especially with the pandemic, there's been a lot more interest from the platforms themselves to get more health content onto their platforms. So
That's
it's been a
great.
really opportune time to kind of get into this space.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I remember reading it a while back. Again, like I think CNN or HuffPost or one of the news outlets wrote an article about this, about how many thousands of hours are spent by physicians looking up procedures on YouTube, and they made it kind of sound like it was a bad thing, but I'm like, no, that's how medicine's done, because there's only, I mean, look, what you read in those textbooks, 40% of the time patients actually present like that, like not
Yeah,
even. And so I think it's great that you guys are creating that kind of content in real time, because I think the old way was, you come out with, let's say, a new procedure, let's say robotic prostatectomy, 2 decades ago, right? But by the time those guidelines are published and everything, right, the procedure might have changed. And then even if it hasn't, once it's been published and you have more people doing the procedures, they discover better ways to approach it, troubleshooting approaches, all those different things. I know you see the same thing in gastroenterology. And so it's not a good thing to wait, even if it's a year, for the annual conference the following year to talk about it, like at a
yeah,
session. It's so much better when physicians can see this in real time, not only I guess in procedure, but also with like, you know, like I'm sure that physicians are starting to use social media to get an idea of like, hey, this is one topic that's starting to trend in the public domain. We should be expecting more of our patients to come in and ask about this. So as a hospital or health system, what's the procedures and guidelines we should put in place right away so we know how to talk about that, versus in the past, you don't know about those kind of things. People come in and it's based on the doctor to decide like, oh, what conflicting information should I give? And you'll have two great doctors giving sort of different opinions about some public domain topic. Does that sound about right?
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, when you mentioned textbooks, like, look, whenever for anyone who's had to contribute to a book chapter or help out with a book, we know how long that process is. It's often years, and by the time the book is actually out and published, a lot of that information may or may not be up to date. And so yeah, I mean, especially with the pandemic, I think what the pandemic has really illustrated is that here comes this virus that's completely unknown, where we have no experience, and there's just all this information getting thrown out. Some of it is peer reviewed, some of it is not. We're trying to communicate with one another to try to figure out what the best solutions are. And that, waiting for that to show up in the next issue of a mailed journal is just not going to cut it when, people are actively, suffering from the pandemic. Especially early on, I think that there was this whole panic because of how little we knew. And to imagine a world where we didn't have social media, I can only think of like what would happen. And I mean, there's pros and cons, as we all know
Yeah.
now, of having social media now, because there's plenty of misinformation that's being put out there too. But I think for scientists and public health experts and physicians and other health professionals, I think it's been, a lifesaver in a lot of ways too.
No, absolutely. And maybe, I don't know if this has been thought about. I hope this is the first time someone's thinking about this idea, but something that I think I would really love to see is that, like for example, on Twitter, right? You get verified if you're a physician or a scientist, right? And
Mhm.
I think that what would be great is if social platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of them, they reach out to physicians and say, okay, if you're a physician, like send us your NPI number, et cetera, and we'll verify you. And so let's say that you're a physician who's, I don't know, in infectious diseases, right? Then if there's a certain post that falls into that category, you can kind of get pinged and say, hey, we would like you to review this post. And maybe there's a group of 20 or 30 or 50 infectious disease physicians that in real time will check a tweet or a post and say, yeah, I know that, like, I agree with that. That's fine. It's verifiable. Or if it's not, you can get flagged right away. So that way, because what I don't like is social media companies trying to decide on these topics as to what's real and what's not, you know? And so I
Yeah.
think they need to put it back in the hands of the people who actually know what the hell they're doing.
It's really tough. And I think that some platforms like Twitter, I think really pushed verifying a lot of physicians during, earlier on in the pandemic. But, it's a bit of a challenge because I've definitely floated this idea with, the social platforms, and I'm sure other people have as well. But it's just difficult because where do you draw the line? Like, it's not just physicians, but there are plenty of other types of health professionals online. And there's some professionals out there where you're kind of, it may or may
A
not
little
be,
gray area.
yeah, a little gray. And so
Yeah.
what do you verify and what do you not? And there are verified physicians out there who are saying really awful things as well that are not
I know which ones you're talking about.
like, it's just because they have an MD or a DO doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're putting out great information either. So it's just,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's tough.
It's funny so I'm gonna get some blowback for this, but yeah, it's funny you mention that because for the general public who's listening, having an MD is not enough to, in my eyes, to be a doctor. Like, you actually have to go through training and residency and everything. So I know people, again, some of them are friends of mine who have an MD. They did not go to training. They're not a doctor in my eyes. They don't know a thing that they're talking about. But some of them, I think it's okay to have MD at the end of your last name. You paid the money, you went through med school, that's fine. But to have the MD and then come out with some like really strong opinion about, a clinical topic, it's like you have like, yeah, just
I
I
think that
disagree.
that's
Yeah.
the key. Is that, especially for a clinical topic, I think that there is a certain amount of training and exposure that you have to have for that. I mean, I understand, like, with broader public health topics and things like that, like, it's, maybe not as necessary, but I think, yeah, for clinical topics, for sure.
Totally. I mean, look, and again, like, I'm saying this kind of tongue in cheek, but like, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, someone sent me something and they're like, "Oh, did you read this like comment about, or this thing from this doctor who's talking about how the virus works?" And I looked at it, I'm like, why do you trust it? Like, oh, it's because this guy's a physician at a really like well-known institution. I'm like, yeah, this guy's a surgeon though. What does a surgeon know about virology? I'm sorry, surgeons, I'm sorry, but it's true. It's the same thing. If you saw somebody from internal medicine commenting about surgery, they would say the exact same thing. Like, but I think, yeah, these are the little nuances of social media. And again, I think the only way that this is going to be improved if more physicians in those specialties they come online, because then you can overwhelm the misinformation with the correct information from the people that you should actually trust for that domain, right?
Yeah, we need, to get more health professionals. It's hard because, there need to be incentives, there needs to be proper guidance, there needs to be a culture that is more accepting of people screwing up and making some mistakes from time to time.
When you say incentives, how what do you mean? What do you mean by incentives? Like, how would you incentivize it if it was you for the United States?
If it was
No
me, I
pressure.
mean, something that I've been actively working on is, at an academic institution, we're not incentivized to contribute to social media or
Mm,
to print media or any media really outside of, publications in medical journals. And yet that's where our patients are getting their information from. So how do we go about trying to build on, that sort of social media participation? That's something that we're trying to figure out right now. But certain institutions like Mayo Clinic have attempted to create a rubric, and I don't know exactly how often that's adopted into real practice, but that's the sort of thing that we need to reorient how we think about social media and the time we spend on it.
interesting. And I think at the end of the day, for anything when it comes to human behavior, like if the incentives aren't there, you're just not going to get the behavior change.
Right.
And I think that the social proof of seeing physicians like you online is a big help. But I think at the end of the day, yeah, the institutions are going to be the ones that are going to really drive this, unfortunately, if the incentives are right.
Mhm.
And I think at least some physicians I talk to, I mean, it's kind of a light incentive where the hospitals are saying we prefer to have, see you on there and everything. But I don't think that's enough. I think there needs to be more of an incentive to reward physicians who are creating content, who are active online, and everything. Because, yeah, here's the other thing. is there's a benefit to people don't follow companies or brands, people follow people. And so there's a benefit to, let's say, a hospital. Let's say if they had 4 or 5 Dr. Austin Changs in different departments, I mean, that boosts their health system brand and trust quite a lot with the community, right?
Hmm.
So I
Yeah,
think there's ways to do that.
yeah, totally. And so it's a work in progress, and I don't expect it to happen overnight, but it's something that we're working on.
Totally. So I want to be respectful of your time. We're getting close to the top of the hour. So now I want to do kind of we wrap up our show usually with rapid fire questions. Okay.
Okay.
Now here's the rule. You can answer this as quickly as you want, which means I'll move to the next question right away, or you can take as long as you'd like.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Awesome.
So question number 1 is, what's the most memorable thing a mentor has ever told you?
Oh gosh. Um, Most memorable thing. I would just say, like, stick to your gut, and don't give into the noise. That's the whole social media thing. Is there was a lot of noise, and I stuck to it, and I was thankful for 1 or 2 mentors who kind of saw the value in it and just stuck to it.
Great. Next question. Physicians, that we have, there's a whole culture behind continuing education well after you graduate, right? So these days, what's a book that you most often gift or, let's say, recommend to people? And it could be not medical book, it could be anything.
Oh, that's a tough one.
I'm gonna
um, hmm. Gosh, I want to say, like, Checklist Manifesto, or one of, like, Atul Gawande's books.
Got
Yeah.
it. Got it. And why Checklist Manifesto? What did you like about the book?
I mean, I think that was just helping to, I may not, like, follow it to a T, but, like, but giving me some perspective about how to approach things, and how to organize
Got
myself, and how to, yeah, make sure that things get done. And I think that was part of it, but just to see someone else's perspective on that.
All right, a couple more. Um, I want you to imagine that for a whole year here in the United States, there's going to be a billboard outside of every hospital. All the physicians, nurses, clinicians, patients, everyone's going to see it, right? And I guess, like, since we focus a lot on physicians, let's just say this is a billboard that just the physicians are going to see for one whole year in front of every single major hospital. What message would you put on that billboard for your peers to see, and why?
For my peers to see. Um, I would probably want to say something very contrary to, like, what we're used to seeing. I want to say, especially for the social media thing, I'm thinking, like, through the lens of this social media conversation, but like, kind of seeing how much misinformation there is, and how many people are buying into that misinformation, um, kind of to stir up things.
Mm.
Not really a positive message, but something to really get people agitated about what's actually happening out there. I think that a lot of the conversations that we have in medicine are so siloed, and we're stuck in our bubble, and that's going to spell the downfall of it all. So we need to really see what people are actually saying out there and respond to that.
So what message would you put on there?
Honestly, it would probably be like a screenshot of some really popular uh, health influencer spewing all sorts of misinformation, so that we so that
That's a good idea.
yeah, like, I think that a billboard that's positive and reinforcing isn't going to do us any good, but something that really gets us, that's going to really provoke us, and get people angry about something, is what's going to spark change.
You're totally right about that. And well said. If I didn't know who I was talking to, the first thing I would say to that answer, I'd say, is that person either works in social media and knows how it works really well, or they're an influencer. So So,
I
yeah, you're totally right about that. You're totally
It's
right.
funny because in some ways, every post that I put out there is a little mini billboard. And, what's going to get someone's attention and what's going to get them to keep on reading or keep on watching. And a lot of the ways that these platforms work is based on how long people stay on your content. If you
Hmm.
think about YouTube, it's a lot of it is based on watch time and whether or not people actually sit through your entire video.
Hmm.
So it just goes to show that there's a little bit of an art to all of this. Yeah.
I no, absolutely. And I think that I think the biggest thing is like, in order to persuade and influence people, you first have to get attention, right? You know?
And we going into medicine don't have this marketing PR mindset. So actually going back to your question about what book to read or something like that, I almost want to say that, spend some time looking at what the influencers are doing. The people that you probably hate because they're famous for no reason. Think about how
Hmm.
they became famous for no reason.
Hmm.
And I think that, behind the scenes, they're putting a lot of effort into maintaining that fame. If you talk about the Kardashians and whatnot, it's not an accident that they were able to maintain this for 20 years.
Yeah.
That there's so many other people who could have, done the same thing, but they came out, and there's a certain formula I think that they have followed to get there. And I wish that we had an insider's look into how that machinery works in healthcare, because imagine if people subscribed to, our way of thought and the information that we're putting out there as much as they did to other topics. That would really change how, I think, how people perceive the healthcare system and how they're able to, trust trust health professionals more and execute their treatment plans.
No, absolutely. And I think, I mean, that is a big pearl of wisdom of what you just said, because I think, again, and I hate to pick on the medical community, but I come from it. So, but I think there's this ego that's there, where if it's not a physician, or it sounds hokey, or it's kind of like, like, again, these influencers, it's kind of rejected. And I really admire the fact that you said that, which is, look, you can hate it all you want. People can hate on the Kardashians, but to your point, for 2 decades, this family built a multi-billion-dollar empire. It did not happen by accident. So I think the key is, and look, we do this in medicine all the time. I mean, Atul Gawande wrote Checklist Manifesto. He didn't come up with checklists, but he
Yeah.
took it from something else and said, how do we take this and apply it to medicine? And I think your point is so spot on, which is, I mean, thinking about it from a healthcare system standpoint, like, how do health systems utilize influencers, let's say, to get a message out there for the public good, right? How do physicians understand how social media works and figure out, okay, this is how I get attention, but once I get attention, here's how I influence it.
Yeah.
I think what you said right there is, I mean, it's so deep and valuable that I really encourage a lot of physicians listening to this to go back and rewind and replay that again and think about it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe partly, why I say that is I faced so many situations in the past where people just didn't believe in this, and years later they've come around, probably not even remembering that they said certain things to me, and have totally changed their outlook on social media and health. And I think it's undeniable now, especially after 2020,
Oh yeah.
that it's really an integral part of health these days.
No, absolutely. And I think 2020, it didn't create any new trends. It just hyper accelerated the inevitable, you know?
Yeah.
Um, well, Dr. Chang, this has been so fantastic. We're definitely gonna have to have you back in the future. Good on you, because I was gonna laugh. I thought for the billboard you would say ahsm.org.
But I think that that's the thing, is like, it's not necessarily promoting the direct idea, but something to get people thinking and then leading them elsewhere.
Totally, totally. And I'll leave in the show notes the links to the ahsm.org. And then, of course, how can people find you online? What's your handle?
Yeah, Austin Chang, MD, AustinChang, MD. I'm basically, it's the same handle everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. I'm probably done there.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Chiang, thank you so much for joining us. So stay on for a few seconds. I'll talk to you in a moment. And thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of Hills and Valleys, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Hills and Valleys. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button on our podcast. That way you're notified of new episodes as they're released. And if you're not already, please go ahead and follow Potrero Medical on all our social platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And we'll see you next time.